When someone says New York, they're often talking about Manhattan, which has little in common with New York State and has a unique identity all to its own, which makes sense given about half of the whole state's residents live in or surrounding Manhattan. With this density of people comes a density of folklore, tall tales, and ghost stories that litter the city, making it hard to avoid something that seems just a bit unnatural. In this video, we're going to discuss some of these tall tales, urban legends, and ghost stories that litter New York City in our final episode talking about the state of New York. If this sounds like your kind of content, it'd help this tiny channel out a lot if you took the time to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and even left a comment saying hi. It'll never cost you a dime, and it's an easy way to tell YouTube that my little channel is worth watching. Anyways, with all that being said, let's get into the video. First up, we're covering a few of the many ghosts of New York City. To start, the McCarren Park Pool is a pool that recently reopened in the 2010s after being closed for 28 years due to its poor condition, although some say that its closing had something a little more sinister afoot. Apparently, according to folklore, a young girl drowned in this pool in the 1970s or 80s, and because of that, paranormal investigators claim that they've caught EMFs and seen apparitions of a young woman walking around the pool begging for help. Now, while this can't necessarily be confirmed, there actually was a confirmed 14-year-old boy in 1977 that passed away on the premises of the McCarren Park Pool. And local residents claim that this might actually be the ghost child that wanders the pool grounds, citing that when they're walking by themselves, they often hear strange sounds, and that their pets might often get jumpy and act distrusting in the direction of the pool. Now, moving upscale in Ghostville, there is the Morris-Jumel Mansion, a site that attracted a plethora of paranormal investigators over the years. This home has existed since the mid-1700s and has played iconic roles, such as the War Room for General George Washington himself, and the home of the infamous Aaron Burr. It's said that in this iconic home, regardless of the acclaim of its former residents, ghosts still do what they always do here, walking around, speaking quietly, and even moving objects. In particular, perhaps wishfully, folks claim that Aaron Burr's old bedroom is a hotspot for activity, and folks have caught a variety of EVPs in this room saying various things that aren't really necessarily vice presidential in nature, but regardless, it's said that the old VP haunts this room. It's also said that Eliza Jamel, the mansion's namesake, is a recurring guest in this home. Eliza was, to put it bluntly, a prostitute who married a French-Haitian merchant and ended up living a rich life after this, moving here in the 1800s. The thing is, though, she didn't seem too appreciative of this move up in the world, as rumors say that her husband's passing may have, at least in part, been her fault, as he mysteriously fell out of a horse-drawn carriage onto a pitchfork, and supposedly, Eliza removed his bandages as he slept after the accident, allowing him to bleed more and pass away. She next married Aaron Burr before his passing, which is more of a fun fact and has apparently little to do with the ghosts here. Now, moving on from the history, the current executive director of the mansion, one Carol Ward, claims that when she's around, perhaps because of Eliza's strong feminist flair, there is more paranormal activity. According to this director, there have been voices of a woman that echoed throughout the home, footsteps around the home, and white noise scanners placed around the home often go staticky when paranormal investigators are around. Additionally, there's one chilling tale where a group of school children visited the mansion, and they were children, so they were being pretty rowdy, when suddenly an older woman came out onto the second floor balcony and yelled at the kids to quiet down, which they then reported to Carol and the rest of the staff at the house. To which she was confused because nobody, especially not an older woman, was supposed to be in the house, let alone on the second floor at that time. Eventually, Carol started the tour and took the children up to Eliza's poster in the home, and suddenly the children got quiet, and one of them remarked to one of the staff members that the woman on the portrait was the one who'd come out and yelled at them to be quiet from the second floor. Next up, have you heard a scarier name for a home than the House of Death? With a name this dramatic, frankly, I was inclined to look the other way and skip this one, but one of my friends demanded I cover this, so here we go. Built in 1856 in Greenwich Village, this home generally housed perfectly normal people, until it started to gain a lousy but also notorious reputation in 1897 when a fairly mundane but apparently notable event occurred here, with one Fred Andrew, a cyclist that was fairly high profile at the time, ending up hitting a kid on his bike and breaking the kid's leg. 3 years after this, Mark Twain, the Mark Twain, lived in this house, but here's where things started getting weird. During this time, Twain was going through turmoil. He was fighting depression and bankruptcy, and in the midst of this, he started noticing paranormal events in the home. In particular, he once saw a piece of wood float through the air by itself across a room, and seeing this, he ended up shooting at the wood, thinking a rat might have been moving it. And sure enough, the wood apparently did fall to the ground after this, and surrounding it were a few drops of blood. A lot of folks on the internet point to this event as paranormal, but frankly, as well as per Twain's account, this blood was simply just proof that it was indeed probably a rat moving around the wood, a creature that, at least in this time, outnumbered the humans in New York City. Additionally, I should throw it out there, as far as people are aware, not that they know anything about ghosts, ghosts don't bleed. Regardless, it's now said that these days, Twain himself is also a ghost in this home and can be seen walking up and down the home stairways. Eventually, in the 1930s, the home was converted into a condominium after Twain's departure. And sure enough, individuals living in the condo have seen Twain, with one family apparently bumping into him sitting on a window seat, and apparently he approached the family and told them that he had a problem that he needed to settle in the home before disappearing right in front of them. Now, in addition to Twain, I should be honest, there are also scarier things afoot in here. In 1957, for instance, an individual who was a self-described psychic and a famous actress, Jan Bryant Bartell, moved into the old servants' quarters and reported that when she did make this move, a large shadow would follow her around the home, and that she often saw the figure of a man in the home, and that when she touched this figure, it wasn't a person and rather felt like mist before disappearing. She would also find rotting food left around the home, as well as small animals around the home that would often react aggressive to her. Eventually, things came to a head though when Bartell's dog passed away in the home, as well as some people shortly after, and eventually Bartell herself passed away shortly after moving to try and escape whatever was going on in the home. To this day, too, the home has a chilling presence that frankly I shouldn't describe on YouTube or risk getting the algorithm angry at me. To be brief about it though, as recently in the 1980s, there have been people whose lives ended in the home by the hands of others under gruesome and perhaps substance-influenced circumstances. And it's perhaps these circumstances that have earned the home its name and reputation that it has today. It's said that to this day, the building just isn't quite right, and apparitions are aplenty, lights flicker, and belongings of people that move there move on their own throughout the home. Finally, how could I forget the ghost ship of the Hudson River? This story is short, but dates back to when New York was known as New Amsterdam, and it tells a story of a ship flying Dutch colors coming up the harbor towards the Hudson. It's said that in this initial tale, cannons were trained on the ship, shooting at it, but regardless of the accuracy of these shots, the cannonballs would simply glide through the cloudy-looking ship. The story dates back to early American nautical history where talk of ghostly ships making their way through misty seas was common, as were shipwrecks and missing individuals that fell off of boats at sea. To this day, there are still supposed witnesses to a ghostly sailing ship passing along the Hudson that sometimes is said to have a strange, eerie green glow to it, and brings those that witness the ship profound discomfort. Some folks explain this as a ghostly repeat of a past incident on the Hudson River with a ghostly crew that's damned to sail forever. While frankly, there's not much credence to this story, they say that to this day, if you're walking along the Hudson River at night, especially if it's misty, you might catch sight of this odd seagoing craft for yourself. So if you're ever in the city at night, take a hard look at the Hudson and tell me if you see something strange. Next up, we have New York City's mole people. a shadowy race of people living below the most bustling city in the country. It's a story that would pique anyone's interest. This urban legend began around the 1800s, when the subway began its construction, and at this point, there are about 700 miles of tunnels running underneath New York City, many of which are abandoned, with not only abandoned subway tracks, but also many unused or ghost subway stations and even rail cars. In addition to people, there are also large rodent and reptile populations in New York City's underground. This might all sound a bit far-fetched, but the truth is more realistic than you'd expect. See, while the city is increasingly closing off abandoned tunnels, it's actually still pretty easy to gain entrance to the New York City subway tunnels, despite being highly illegal. And it's thought that through this method, that many, estimated over 2,000 homeless individuals have gained access and started living inside of New York City's underground. This is particularly common in the winter, when cold temperatures and the desire for warmth push many to seek it underground, where the temperatures are more consistent year-round. Here, believe it or not, it's said that you can find bustling underground communities where individuals take shelter in encampments of their making, but also on abandoned train platforms and even inside of unused rail cars sometimes. Their communities are tight-knit. It's said that individuals living in them look after one another, but also there's a bit of territorialness to the tunnels they live in, with different groups, and there are hierarchies within these groups. Now, even if going below ground has helped these individuals escape the cold, it's not necessarily a safe place to live. Underground, there's no food source, and there's no law enforcement officers to come to your aid when crimes are committed. They also can't really leave the tunnels until dark, or they risk being seen and apprehended. There's also not even any light, and reports often say that individuals in the tunnels of New York City use light that's cast down from ventilation ducts and holes in the sidewalks to read and get around. So in short, there aren't any mole people, just people. But the urban legend that people do live under your feet as you're walking around the streets of Manhattan is indeed true, and sadly, a bit more tragic than the urban legend paints it. Next, we have New York City's Car Bermuda Triangle. Yes, you heard that right. Some folks say that Manhattan has its own little twist on the Bermuda Triangle, but that this dangerous zone has a particular affinity for cars and surrounds the Empire State Building. While personally I've had plenty of experiences with cars not starting in general, anecdotally, individuals claim that something is at play, as supposedly an unusual amount of vehicles, even modern ones, refuse to start when they're in this triangle's bounds. Suspicion of this phenomenon started when individuals working at and around the Empire State Building noticed that about 10 to 15 cars would get stuck or fail to start next to the Empire State Building on a daily basis. This wasn't just happenstance either, as the phenomenon is confirmed by local AAA providers in the region, and they've even mentioned in an interview that if you just tow the car a few blocks away, it would sometimes start up without any other intervention. Now, the cause of this is claimed to be the presence of the many radio and TV transmission equipment on the building's spire up above, which supposedly send radio waves which jam locking systems and influence car security systems. Even more dubious, some folks claim that the skyscrapers conduct electricity in such a way that the magnetic force can be sucked out of a car's power system. By the way, that's a direct quote, and I'll be the first to admit that's not a very scientifically sound mechanism that they just proposed. Now, regarding the cause of a noticeable amount of cars not starting near the Empire State Building, I think we can all guess the real culprit. It's cited that over 2 million cars feed through the Queens Midtown Tunnel on a monthly basis, and that most of these cars end up in the region defined by the Empire State Building Triangle. Thus, it makes a bit more sense to just say that these breakdowns are the result of random chance, and that the number of cars you see broken down is higher simply because the number of cars in the region is anomalously high. Moving on to Staten Island, we have Cropsey. Staten Island, while still a borough of New York City, could easily make you think twice about where in the state you are and whether you're actually that close to New York City. On Staten Island, while there are dense neighborhoods, trains, and businesses, there are also large swaths of undeveloped woods that lie quietly behind homes on neighborhood streets. It's said that here in these woods prowled a man that might have been equal part monster, abducting children in the 1970s and 80s. This man was said to have a hook for a hand, and if you took a look at him, you'd see that he was so horribly disfigured that he might not have even appeared human, with scars and burn marks all across his body and face. It's said that Cropsey was once normal like the rest of us, but after losing his child in some sort of accident, he tried to fill the hole in his heart by taking children from other people to replace his own. The thing is though, Cropsey isn't all fiction, as in the 1980s there was a monster living on Staten Island that eerily fit his description and inspired fictional horror for decades to come. The true person that lingers behind the name Cropsey is one Andre Rand, a man born in the 1940s who was a custodial worker at Willowbrook State School on Staten Island. Now this man first gained notoriety when he made the dubious choice of taking a bus with 11 children aboard in 1983 to the Newark International Airport without any permission. A creepy choice to say the least. Now this decision didn't result in any of the kids getting hurt, but it certainly scared the parents and put Rand in jail for 10 months. This would pale in comparison to the accusations that came next though, as for years after this, Rand would be accused of being the last person seen with children that were going missing in the area, and in 1987, with the disappearance of one Jennifer Schweiger, these accusations would become something more. In 1988, Rand was arrested for the kidnapping and, well, the ending of a child, with evidence tying him to Jennifer's disappearance. This was all followed, too, by him being tied to the disappearances of 4 more children, and also being charged with their kidnapping, and with the ending of 3 of them. Eventually, before a jury, it was made fairly clear that Rand was the one who kidnapped these children, but they could never prove that they were ended by him. Regardless, he was jailed, and will remain jailed until 2037, if indeed he lasts that long, that is. And likely, Staten Island's children are now safe from the real-life Cropsey at least. Although to this day, some worry about the glaring fact that the endings were never pinned on Rand, and that perhaps he might not have been working alone. Finally, we're going to talk about the alligators that live in New York City's sewers. Now, if you've walked the streets of New York since October of 2023, there's a chance you've seen a relatively new sculpture, which shows an alligator sitting atop a manhole cover. Now, if you've seen this among the other pieces of art that litter the city, it might not have stood out to you much because it feels like everywhere you turn in this city, there's a world-renowned museum. But surprisingly, this piece of art is a nod to one of New York City's most prominent urban legends, that there are alligators roving around, unseen in New York City's sewers. Now, the legend has it that perhaps on a trip down south, back in the day, some children might have persuaded their parents to get them a baby alligator as a pet because they were so cute and tiny. But when they got bigger and were clearly becoming dangerous to have as a pet, parents would slip the baby gator into a manhole cover or flush it down the toilet. These gators didn't die though. No, rather they fed on trash, feces, and rats, and found other gators to mate with, thriving and forming a colony of gators that lives on to this day in the sewers of Manhattan, threatening to chomp at anyone who dares venture into them. You're probably thinking to yourself, this legend is insane. And frankly, you're not far off because it is pretty crazy, but even crazier is that there's actually a shred of truth to this legend that might make you think twice before you jump in the sewers if, you weren't already scared of getting bathed in feces from doing that. In short, you really could buy alligators back in the day. For instance, the man that actually made the aforementioned statue I was talking about found an ad from the 1930s in the magazine Popular Mechanics, which is still around to this day, selling baby alligators for $1.50, which would be shipped by mail to homes that responded. Also back in the day, it was quite common for Florida souvenir shops to sell baby alligators in fish tanks to tourists. There are also real accounts of families flushing these pets down the toilet. Even crazier, there have actually been gators found in the sewers of New York City before. One tale, told by the old commissioner of the sewers in the 1930s, Teddy May, reports that sewer inspectors frequently reported seeing gators in the sewers starting around 1935, and one individual reported to find many approximately 2-foot-long gators living in the sewers, to which the city responded by putting out poisoned bait and flushing the tunnels to draw the gators out into an area where hunters could get the gators. These efforts led to the 1937 announcement by Teddy May that the gators of the sewers were officially gone. Now, I should warn you here, there's skepticism as to the accuracy or even truth of these claims that throws doubt at whether this whole saga actually even occurred. But regardless, they do come from a real human being that had a real job to manage the sewers of New York City, so take them for what you will, I suppose. Regardless, to this day, the legend of sewer gators persists, and dare I say, the gator population might still exist too, as in 2010, the NYPD caught something funny in the sewers of Queens, New York: a 2-foot-long baby alligator. Thank you all for joining me today on this journey through New York City. Remember, if you liked this video and want future and past videos from me to show up on your feed, that you can subscribe to this channel and even like this video if you want the world to know that I exist. This way, you won't miss it when we move on to our next episode. And remember, most importantly, whether you just saw a gator crawling out of a storm drain, or if you saw Mark Twain standing in the stairwell after locking up your apartment, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.